is Dirk Rodricks. I'm a PhD student here at Boise, working in curriculum studies and teacher development at the Department of Curriculum Teaching and Learning at the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education. Welcome to what we hope will be a really useful dialogue between varying perspectives in how we, through drama and theater, can do our part in reclaiming the radical. We hope for it to be really truly an evening of exploration, of exchanging ideas, identifying issues that we see in the work that we do, and take advantage of having a really, really distinguished panel of practitioners, researchers, but in true fashion, each of them is an activist. I've had the good fortune of actually working with them over the last few days in a series of meetings that explore the work in their sites as part of a research project. And what I see each of them represents is a really fierce activism towards the use of drama and theater. And I hope that you will engage with them to bring that forward. It is my pleasure to introduce you to the Associate Dean for Research, International and Innovation, Professor Michelle Peterson-Badali. And here she is.
Thank you very much, Dirk. I wanted to come tonight just to welcome all of you here on behalf of OISE, on behalf of the Office of the Dean and Interim Dean Glenn Jones and myself. We are so delighted that Kathleen has put this fabulous event together. I think it culminates a very intense and wonderful week that she's had with some tremendous educators and scholars from all over the world. And Dirk mentioned that, which I think has been a wonderful opportunity for everybody, but lovely that they are able to be here tonight as well and be part of this panel for you. And very Reclaiming the Radical, I mean, what an important and timely title, although it seems that every day there's something that reminds us that this needs to happen. So I'm just delighted that you're here. Welcome educators, welcome students, and I hope that you have a stimulating and really wonderful evening together. So thanks very much for coming and enjoy the evening.
Musical chairs. A warm welcome, everyone. I'm so delighted that you've come to join us this evening. Let me get this out of my line of vision. There we go. So I have rewritten these brief introductory remarks at least 10 times over the last 4 days because my understandings have been complexified and in some cases entirely overturned by presentations and arguments made by my collaborators, who are each of them making sense of the world and our relationships to each other from their own very different contexts. I'm having trouble finding the right words. So let me start with the easy part, the thank yous. First to you for being here, of course, for what we think is a conversation that matters. And of course, Dirk said, we're here for a conversation, which is why we're sitting up at a podium with microphones in a line to speak to you in a very regimented way because we really wanted to have a conversation. But actually, the room was not available that would have facilitated that, so we're stuck with this structure. But after, I think, we share some very enlightening perspectives, we might bust out of this rigid form and see if we can't have a more collaborative conversation. So, first I must say a huge thanks to my research team here in Toronto for all the work they've done in making this evening possible and the entire week of discussions with our international collaborators, and they have made it such an utter success. And they are Dirk Rodricks, Rachel Rhodes, Rebecca Starkman, Kelsey Jacobson, Scott Mealy, Sherry B., Nancy Cardwell, and Lisa Aikman. And big thanks to my international collaborators for happily agreeing to this panel event, and I will introduce them when they take the mic. And of course also to Christine Jackson from the TDSB for engaging so heartily with our research and helping us to think about ways to leverage ideas and practices for teachers and students in schools. And of course to SSHRC, the funder of this project, for their ongoing support of research that takes the relationship between art, art making, education, and social life very seriously. So I'm holding two things true. One, we have had an extraordinary week together, talking across our very different cultures and contexts, wrestling with important questions about art and social life, seeing plays, visiting schools in Toronto. We have been globalizing our research imaginations. Two, our world is a mess, and we are living in dangerous times. In our research, we're asking what makes the classroom a forum of civic engagement in the present, as well as an experience that may cultivate civic engagement later in life. Can drama pedagogies actually help young people see themselves as global civic actors? Collaborating across our schools and theater-making spaces in Canada, India, Taiwan, England, and Greece, our study is examining how the drama classroom or workshop can cultivate practices, relationships, dispositions, and values that orient youth towards and support them in engaged citizenship and ethical relations. It is a tall order. And a prevailing hope. Now, concerning hope. When we imagined this evening, the title of this evening, Reclaiming the Radical Drama in Dangerous Times, it was long before the now consuming events in Paris. So I'm aware that our title seems now to have other resonances, may even seem to be speaking to a particular event that hadn't yet happened. But wars, occupations, economic crises, and social dislocation were already shaping our realities in classrooms. And concerns over growing and entrenched forms of social and economic inequality and racism were already pressing on us. The Paris events and loss of life, the ensuing violence against racialized and particularly Muslim communities in cities across the globe, are only the latest rendition of a state of insecurity that now very clearly defines our times. So we wanted to initiate a conversation this evening with you. We are caught up in the pressing idea that drama classrooms, as we have come to understand them, are often what we might call first responders. Their curriculum is the world, and the world has its way of interjecting itself. And students come to school needing to process and respond to that world. Students want to make sense of the worlds around them. And drama can be a critical method of investigation and intervention. We need to think about drama in dangerous times. And we wanted to have a conversation that was rooted in our particular locations around the globe and our efforts to have conversations about youth social unrest across racial, cultural, linguistic, geopolitical divides. So our study aims to yield empirical evidence related to cultural theorist Richard Sennett's argument that the fates of people, and in our case young people, Strangers within and across the global North and South are increasingly diverging as inequality grows more pronounced in neoliberal regimes. Sennett offers new ways to think about empathy, and we know that term, in intercultural exchange that may open the possibility for a critical responsiveness that respects the other's own relations and world. Sennett believes that sympathy often aims to overcome differences through acts of identification, and we know that one well too. But empathy remains an encounter, which for us is a very critical difference. And it invites us to attend to other people in their own terms. So each year of the study, we draw from a different model of drama, a different form of pedagogy, a different kind of practice to create and share cultural productions across our sites. Last year was our first year, and we used verbatim theater across our sites. And this year we're using oral history performance. And next year we'll draw from devising and ensemble practices. So hope may seem like an unlikely subject in these times. But hope, as we have observed it, is not a state or a possession, but a practice of the most salient and resilient youth we've met, a way of working that slowly comes to circulate, often in unanticipated ways, as the struggle to create something together takes hold. Young people are not hoping for something. They are practicing what it might be like to live with hope, even when their material or social conditions make that very difficult to do. Through drama and applied theater, a walk in another person's words become, in striking instances, the source of radical hope. How do teachers and students practice hope together? How do we practice hope through our theater making? How does hope live uncomfortably alongside disappointment and disengagement, or worse, exclusion and marginalization? I am now concerned to think through the ways in which drama students come to practice hope in the microecologies of classrooms, when broader neoliberal experiences of individualism and technologies of divisiveness threaten its very sustainability. So in these times of global uncertainty and growing socioeconomic polarization, I think we must think of modes of hope and hoping differently. Philosopher Richard Rorty coined the term social hopes, meaning hopes for global, cosmopolitan, democratic, egalitarian, casteless, classless societies. He explicitly linked hope with democracy and suggested that students following a Deweyan education, there's something new, would acquire an image of themselves as heirs to a tradition of increasing liberty and rising hope. It could not seem further from the truth to me these days. Lingus offers a salient insight about students who struggle socially and academically in schools because of the disadvantages and barriers they face, claiming that hope doesn't come out of what went before, but in spite of what went before. And for Zernazi, the idea of hope is linked to the existence of political alternatives. So looking ahead in our project, we want to work methodologically to create new imaginaries of hope through theater. Not sentimental, saccharine fantasies of an unlikely future, but hopes grounded in present social relations, politically clear-eyed, critically and affectively engaged. How do we cross our contexts and engage in that kind of conversation? We've settled tonight upon a few key questions to animate our panel discussion. And different panelists will respond to different questions from their vantage points. Those questions for us were, what kind of a metaphor is theater for the world? How do we use drama to build ethical relations? What is the relationship between form, content, and context? How do we understand collaborative pedagogical models in theater making? What is dangerous for students and educators? And how do we act responsibly? How is the idea of hope linked to the existence of political alternatives? In light of ongoing and overlapping global crises, what can we do with art? So after a panelist addresses one of these questions in 7 minutes only, that should solve it. We're then going to invite Christine Jackson to perform the Herculean task of responding to the ideas and questions raised, drawing from her particular system perspective at the Toronto District School Board. We really hope as well that this evening will launch an ongoing community of practice for drama teachers in our city to come together to deliberate pressing questions about drama practices, young people, and framings of our political and cultural worlds. So, without further ado, I want to call to the podium Andrew Kushner, who is a Toronto-based theatre artist, an actor, a playwright, and the creative director of Project Humanity, and he is a member of our Toronto-based research team. And we had the extraordinary pleasure 2 nights ago of seeing Andrew's show that opened only last night called Wormwood at Toronto's Tarragon Theatre. And he's going to speak to us about theatre as metaphor. He's pretty well placed to do that, I think. How is theatre the practice, the space, and time of it, the ritual, a kind of metaphor for the world? Andrew.
As Kathleen mentioned, I opened Wormwood last night, and after the show was stormed by person after person who wanted to share their experience of the play. In some cases, wanting to figure out whether or not they had got the play, had they deciphered the play. And it reminded me something that my colleague Alan Dilworth always says, which is human beings are meaning-making machines. Metaphors are food. They are nutritious. We crave them. The comprehension and digestion of metaphors is something that is vital to us. It allows us to feel more human. I've used a lot of metaphors already. But I will say metaphor begets metaphor. That's my theory. I've been asked to speak about theater as a kind of metaphor for the world. As a theater practitioner, I feel that metaphor is what I work with, what I'm devoted to. I believe we come to the theater to unabashedly engage in and practice metaphor. And I believe we invented theater as a species because it's giving us an effective tool in the struggle to figure out our being in the world. The existence, the survival of theater as a form, the fact that young people want to keep practicing theater is no accident. I believe that theater is a temple for metaphor. On stage, a powerful lighting instrument fires artificial light through a window frame and we see a sunny day. An actor utters pieces of prepared dialogue and we hear a character speaking. An actor holds a bundle of cloth and we see a newborn infant. A chair is toppled and we see, if the play has prepared us for it, the breakdown of a family, or the start of a revolution, or the fall of an empire. Theater is all about transformation, and metaphor is the way that happens. Even in verbatim theater, which is what I chiefly practice, as soon as verbatim text is transferred to the stage, it takes on metaphoric power. In The Middle Place, a piece I wrote about homeless youth, the words in the script gathered from interview subjects become a representation of at-risk youth, but they become something larger. They at times become a capacity to speak about the health of our democracy, the health of our society as a whole. So my feeling is that we come together in the theater, artists and audience, in order to engage with things that are not really there: a baby, a sunny day, an empire collapsing, a homeless youth, in order to have very real feelings about them. Those real feelings, and I'll add to this real thoughts and real reflections, is something that humanizes us. And the practice of doing that, of humanizing ourselves through theater, I believe, is evidence of our craving of a more hopeful, more thriving world. If theater is a kind of metaphor for the world, then transformation is possible in the world, because things transform in the theater. Change is possible. And that change comes through a collective effort, a shared labor. We imagine together. We feel together. That is a hopeful thing. If theater is a kind of metaphor for the world, then congregation is possible in the world. In the theater, we engage with a representation of the world. We do so on a human scale together, artists and audience. We have a personal ride amongst others. That is a hopeful thing. If theater is a kind of metaphor for the world, then collaboration is possible in the world. We come to the theater to co-create meaning. We work together, artists and audience, to find the patterns, to make order of the chaos, to engage with the dissonance and mystery of the world. That is a hopeful thing. If theater is a kind of metaphor for the world, then the world is a place where multiple truths can coexist. Because in the theater, if we make the effort, there is space for multiple truths at once. In our more divisive and dangerous times, as politics and media seem to grow more and more polarized, theater can be a freeing, creative, expansive alternative. That is a hopeful thing. Transformation, congregation, collaboration, multiple truths. I can't help but think theater is a kind of hopeful metaphor for the world. It's an honor to be a part of this panel, and I'm very excited for tonight's conversation.
It's my privilege now to introduce you to Dr. Wanjun Wang, who is an associate professor at the Department of Drama Creation and Application at the National University of Tainan in Taiwan, and our beloved collaborator.
Thank you, Kathleen, and thank you for coming tonight. So I'm just going to jump right into my question and my answer to it. For me, my catalyst is memory and the theater, because memory crosses culture and connects people from different parts of the world. But it has to be activated and communicated in our organized class and the structure and the pedagogies. From my experience as a drama teacher, I use drama as a medium of communication to explore and act out our memory, to take memory apart and to reconstruct it and to find meanings in our memory researching. I have researched Age Exchange Center's reminiscent theater work in UK and also Huanxi Theater Group in Taiwan as my PhD thesis of reminiscent theater, devising and performance at the University of London from 2003 to 2008. And I have witnessed how memory communicates across cultures movingly and beautifully. I saw how I have been thrilled, cried, and laughed with the British elders from African, Caribbean, Chinese, Indian, British elders from Brighton and London. They shared memories, how they grew up in London, in Reminiscent Theatre Festival, as much as I was moved by Huanxi Theatre Group's performance of Reminiscent Theatre about mother-daughter relationship. And I also have experienced how these performances has expanded my horizon as a drama teacher and as a person immensely. And later, I have begun to adapt their methodologies of devising and performance into my university's oral history theater class from 2008 to 2016. I have created 8 oral history performances with my sophomore students, and I have received, all of us together, received critical acclaim and won full house attention each year. I want to share a little bit about my achievements with my students that I have observed from these oral history performances created and performed by my university students are: A, the affirmation of their contested identities through reviewing their past, selecting their own stories, and which they consider can represent themselves, and expressing their own negotiated identities in public. The whole process seemed to affirm these teenagers' self-identities, which are often silenced and marginalized in our societies. B, in the devising process, by reflecting on one's own and each other's past life experiences, the students seem to be able to empathize with other people's life experience more and care more about each other. Also, through the sharing and discussion period of devising process, they activated the ethics of care in turning I-it relationship into an I-you relations. And then they try to use aesthetic means of theater performance such as playwriting, stage design, lighting design, costume and makeup design, as well as music design, to transform their life story experience into a moving performance which their audience found tremendous resonance. And in this process, they are able to distance themselves from their own and one another's story and make them into a piece of collaborative artwork shared with their audience. The third part is aesthetic. The theater aesthetics provide my students with means to keep an aesthetic distance from their own stories, as well as to engage their audience to empathize with their stories, to find their shared identities and humanities in the shared stories, which also reflect the audience's own past. And through this kind of empathetic and reflective viewing experience, the participants and audience can gain different perspectives, discover different kinds of insights toward their past. And through this process, they can also get a chance to reflect upon their own past. So they can be able to know where they come from, where they are now, and also what they aspire to be in the future. So I want to talk last about the challenges we have in the process. The first is the process go into your memories is not a therapeutic effect only, but therapy is not, it has its therapeutic effect, but therapy is not its end. The aesthetic, political, and ethical process is the most important to learn from. And the second is about the authenticity issue. It's the emotional truth rather than the factual truth that we are trying to explore in the process. The reconstruction process is a meaning-seeking and searching process, and reinterpretation of one's own life, and a renegotiation process, a very challenging working process. And third is the collaborative process. It's always difficult, but I find the fights and the difficult things they encounter in the communication process even more valuable for them to learn from. And fourth is the real issues in life they have encountered and conjure up through this memory searching process. It's like opening up the Pandora's box. Those life issues are never easy to be solved and resolved, but only can be presented and discussed. But they just have another chance to understand the complexity of life and have the chance to learn how they can live with their difficulties as their peers. So I can only say it is a risky adventure each time, but the risk is worth taking because drama class is one of the few places they can get to discuss and explore these important issues about memory and understand the memory's relationship to the construction of self. Each time we go through this life exploring process, the value is shared by my students and myself with the same commitment, determination, and passion. That's why memory connects us across cultures, which we can identify each other with and differentiate with each other. To use drama aesthetics for memory searching journey make us reflect upon where we are coming from in the past, understand who we are now, and where we are standing now. and how we are going to go in the future. With all the chaos and uncertainties all around us in today's world, I cannot imagine anything else is more important than this for my students and myself. And I also hope my sharing can be of use for you and your class sometime in your lives. How far am I going to use my time? Time is wrap up. Yes, I want to share with you my last memory about Toronto, because I'm leaving this country in 5 or 6 hours. Toronto, I have traveled around the world. Toronto is one of the most friendly cities. I have known these wonderful friends, and thank you for coming tonight. I went to the museum this afternoon, and I pick up leaves. I think the leaves of Toronto and all your friendship and love is our hope for this chaotic world surrounding us, and let us cling to it. Thank you very much.
Thank you for telling people what the question was, which was my only job. So now you know that Wanjung was looking at how theater might help us look back and forward. I'm not going to make that mistake again. Okay, I'd like to invite to the podium Dr. Urvashi Sani, who is the founder and CEO of Prerna Girls School, Study Hall Foundation in Lucknow, India. And Urvashi is going to consider theater as collaborative pedagogy. How do we understand collaborative pedagogical models in theater making?
Thank you, Kathleen, and thank you all for being here. And thank you for inviting me to your beautiful city, and for the panel tonight, and for the lovely week that we've had. Before I answer your question, I just want to situate everyone a little and talk a little about my context and where I'm coming from. I come from India, which, as you know, is a very large, very diverse, very complex country with a very long, ancient history, a very long, ancient civilization that it comes from. It's a country of 1.2 billion people, and that's 1/6 of the world's population. It's a developing country and poor, with layers and layers of inequalities, of caste, of class, of gender, of religion, and with every problem under the sun, which makes it one of the most interesting countries in the world to live in and to work in. We are a democracy, and our biggest claim to fame is that we are one of the largest democracies in the world. And when we got our freedom in 1947, no one expected the country to last very long. They expected that it would disintegrate or become a dictatorship, like our neighbors were, or an army-ruled country, but it didn't. It survived as a democracy. Despite which, like many democracies around the world, it may be a political democracy, but in fact, almost all its institutions, from families to corporations to schools, are very hierarchically structured and very undemocratically structured, with power being held in the hands of few in the patriarchal families, which are represented in almost all the other structures. Nothing collaborative or democratic about the structures and the institutions, which then sometimes makes you wonder that how can you call yourself a democracy when almost everything within the democracy is undemocratic. I run a school, a foundation, which altogether we try to serve many populations, urban, rural, children with special needs, middle class, rural poor, urban poor. And the goal there is to see how we might integrate it and have a democratic functioning. I want to speak today about the girls' school that Kathleen mentioned, Prerna, which we are very fortunate. She was even able to visit, and this is my second project with her in this. The girls from Prerna, we started with 30, and we now have 800 in Prerna. They come from very, very poor homes where they are faced with every kind of challenge. India is not a hospitable place for its daughters. They're unequal, unsafe, and unwanted. They're unsafe in the womb, they're unsafe at home, they're unsafe on the streets. My girls come from similar backgrounds. And when we started educating them, we understood very quickly that unless we were able to work with the issues that surround them, any education that we gave them would not, it might help them graduate, it might give them literacy and numeracy, but it wouldn't help them meet the challenges that they were going to face being girls in India. So we put empowerment of girls very squarely at the center of our work. And by empowerment I mean, because again that's a term that's used all over, we decided that classrooms and schools could be radical spaces of possibility, and by radical here I mean a bold, brave move to try and think the unthinkable, to imagine the unimaginable, and try to change entrenched structures, and to hope for a better world. So, and by empowerment we meant that they must understand that they are oppressed, they must understand the structures that oppress them, they must learn to perceive themselves as equal, autonomous persons, worthy of respect, and then they must build the capacity to aspire to that equality, find voice and agency. And how did we do this? We put in place a critical feminist pedagogy, and which is very simple really, just sounds very big. That every week for 1 hour, we would sit in circles and we would talk. I want to invoke Paulo Freire, who really is the father of critical pedagogy. And the idea was that if you can name your world, you can transform it. So we would sit and we would make shared meaning. We would have shared feelings. We would talk about domestic violence. We would talk about sexual violence. We would talk about child marriage. We would talk about discrimination, how you're fed less, how you're supposed to wear veils when nobody else is. Everything that concerned us, and we would share it in a collaborative manner, and it would be a collaborative forum of teaching and learning where each of us took the responsibility to create and recreate our realities again. And drama, right from the beginning, was very much part of our critical pedagogy. Because we believe very much that in order to create a self, you need a site, a place, and that was our space. And you do that with your reason, and you do it with your imagination, you do it with your hands, with your heart, with your head, with your mind. And drama was the best place where you could have your hearts work with your mind. So often while we were talking, we'd get up and act out things. And we would take every issue that we could and collaboratively with each other play out our realities, imagine possible selves. Andrew, you spoke about metaphor, drama, theater as metaphor for the world. And here we use the metaphors for our lives to imagine possible selves. So if you can imagine it, then you can live it. To rehearse possible selves, to rehearse alternative realities, so that we could take action in our lives and socially. We've been doing this for 12 years, and many of our girls have been able to not only finish school, many of them are getting their masters. They have been able to change their realities at home, escape child marriage, in many cases strengthen their mothers, and change violent fathers at home. Take to the streets and have street plays against domestic violence, against alcoholism. So we definitely believe, one, that if we're going to have a democracy in the real sense of the word, then our institutions must become democratic. Theater making, if we had more time, I would describe it in greater detail, and Dirk is waving the 1-minute flag at me, so I must quickly wrap up. That we must show models of collaborative living, of collaborative feeling, collaborative thinking, collaborative reasoning, collaborative imagining. And theater making is a great tool for that. But I don't want to separate it out. I think it should be a pedagogical model for all kinds of education, where together teachers and students and communities take the responsibility for knowledge making, for teaching, and for learning. And I think it happens when you feel together, when you think together, when you reason together, and when together you take responsibility for a world, for dangerous times and peaceful times, and together you hope, and not a fond hope, but a real hope. I think all educators are hopeful people. We wouldn't be teaching otherwise. Pedagogy is an act of hope. Teaching is an act of hope. And it takes brave hearts and minds, which I think as educators we all are. And how to transfer it to your children, to your students, and you do that when you include them in the whole process. I think I'm done. Thank you.
Oh my goodness. I'd like to welcome to the podium now Dr. Rachel King, who is an assistant professor in creativity, performance, and education at the Centre for Education Studies at the University of Warwick in Coventry, England. And she is speaking about the theme of risk and responsibility, a perfect segue from Urvashi's last thoughts. What is dangerous for students and educators in using theatre, and how do we act responsibly?
Hello. I think the peripheral noise of ambulance or whatever it is, the sirens, makes me think we are in dangerous times. Okay. So as Kathleen has already, can you hear me? Yeah. As Kathleen has already referenced, reclaiming and reconceptualizing the notion of radical in hopeful terms is particularly pertinent right now in these so-called dangerous times. This is my first time over in North America, and having left London Heathrow on Saturday morning just after the attacks in Paris, I feel strangely, unexpectedly, and particularly European. In his book, After Empire, Melancholia, or Convivial Culture, 2004, Paul Kilroy articulates a hopefulness he has about the emergence of a convivial culture in Europe that has offset the feelings of post-colonial melancholia that have begun to characterize post-colonial countries such as Britain and France. Gilroy turns his sociological gaze to examples of sociality that exist across racial and cultural and ethnic difference. These are the lived experiences of conviviality that are being worked out in the messiness of the urban space. And he suggests that these examples offer a more positive interpretation of the perceived failures of multiculturalist and assimilationist policies that have been part of both post-war Britain and France. He invites critical reflection on the ways we relate to each other. I just want to read this quote out. We need to know what sorts of insight and reflection might actually help increasingly differentiated societies and anxious individuals to cope successfully with the challenges involved in dwelling comfortably in proximity to the unfamiliar without being fearful or hostile. In my own drama and theatre practice-based research with culturally diverse groups of young people, this hopeful notion of dwelling comfortably in proximity to the unfamiliar without being fearful or hostile is a port, an anchor, a refuge to which I return to in these dangerous times. For me, the drama space is where we come to learn and make sense of the messiness of difference, however that difference may be marked. The playfulness of the drama space invites us to continually improvise, interact, listen, fail, rehearse, and reimagine together. You will all, I'm sure, have stories that speak to the ways drama and theatre processes have brought a fractured group of young people together. You will, I'm sure, all have examples of practice that have caused you to feel hopeful about the potentiality of drama and theatre space to form friendships and bonds across gender, ethnicity, and social class. When the bell goes and the drama session is done, Who knows how durable these bonds are within the corridors or the maths class or even in the neighbourhoods. But during that time and in that space, the pedagogies of drama and the artistry of theatre can be used to bring strangers into proximity with the unfamiliar without being fearful or hostile. Part of this process, I suggest, is due to the ways the drama and theatre practitioner takes on the risky responsibility to create space for young people to challenge and contest a multiplicity of very difficult and controversial ideas. In light of what happened on the portentous Friday the 13th, I decided to share an example of practice that speaks directly to the macro narratives of these dangerous times. I do not use this platform to suggest that this example is without contention. Rather, I want to give space to the ways a practicing theatre and education company in Britain is attempting to respond positively to the challenges of working amongst and within the complex and everyday sites where diverse communities of young people dwell. Following the 7/7 bombings in London in 2005, it emerged that 3 of the 4 suicide bombers were born in Britain. In her book, Multicultural Horizons, Anne-Marie Fortier documented the ways this event provoked major rethinking about what had led these, quote, children of multicultural Britain to extremism. The Labour government, coalition government, and now the Conservative government have all subscribed to various iterations of what they call the prevent duty, initiatives that aim to, quote, prevent violent extremism and protect children from radicalisation. And the Department of Education has been a central focal point for this. In 2008, the Playhouse, a working theatre and education company with whom we have a strong partnership, were approached by a division of the police that carry out this prevent duty. They were asked to devise... Oh, I've lost my place, hang on. Sorry. I'm never use an iPad is the key. They'd been invited to devise a touring theatre piece that would deal directly with these issues. Deborah Packer Hall, the director of the company, was faced with a dilemma. Does she take on this responsibility to find an aesthetic and educational form, or does she reject the invitation? What are the real political risks involved in doing this work, but more significantly, what are the educational risks of not doing this work? At the time, the company's studio was located in the centre of Birmingham. It's a very multicultural city, inside a large primary school and opposite Birmingham's largest mosque. Given their geographical position within the community, Deborah was determined that the company were not parachuted in to solve the problem, but rather it was imperative that they conducted considerable research with local communities and listened to the messiness and complexities of voices. What emerged from this research was a key principle for the company that would not just they would not just focus on Al-Qaeda or Islamic State-inspired ideology, but it would give us much space to explore the right-wing, racist extremism that is often associated with nationalist movements in Britain, such as the BNP and the English Defence League. They produced Tapestry, a participatory theatre piece that gives young people space to make sense of the ways socio-economic factors play a central role in shaping young people, be they white British or racialised pupils, their sense of disengagement and a lack of belonging in civic society. There is a report on this, by the way, by Joe Winston, who's my colleague, but I'll just tell you a little bit. One of their techniques that they do is that they do role swapping. We often say that we step into the shoes of others in drama processes, but actually they do this on stage. So the characters, Jason, Naz, and Hassan, they actually tell each other's stories, and they physically swap roles. They share roles out, and so the audience watch them step into each other's shoes. This is a very nice technique that they use. They take turns to play out each other's stories live on stage. I'm nearly there. It is within this shared, playful space that the audience members are then invited to ask questions of the characters and connect the drama that they've seen to the drama in their own lives and to make choices with them. So it's very much forum theatre style. In my own practice-led research working with multicultural communities, I'm reminded time and again that if we're not open to the risky, difficult conversations, then we are closing down the possibilities for young people to make sense of the social injustices that they navigate in their daily lives, and these serve to fracture and polarize them further. Theatre can provide an imagined, fictional, metaphorical context in which we can understand the interconnectedness of our futures. Thank you.
Thank you, Rachel. I'd like to call up now Mr. Nikos Govas, who is a theater and drama pedagogue, and he is the founder of the Hellenic Theater and Drama and Education Network in Athens, Greece.
Right. Which I use this one. Okay, thank you. Good evening. I'm really pleased and honored to be here among colleagues. Thank you very much, Kathleen. And I want to share with you two of the many issues that are taking place now in Greece, among which I think they're not only Greek, but they're European. I was thinking about what are dangerous times and what might be hope within these dangerous times that we're living. So I'm kind of try to focus on two things. One is the economic crisis, the other one is the refugee crisis, which is the bigger picture, which they both influence our life as teachers in education. I'm going through some photographs, and first I would like you to see the map of Europe as it is today. It wasn't like that a few years ago, and probably won't be in the next few years. And these are dangerous times when maps change. The dangerous times is the economical crisis. It is dangerous times for us. 25% unemployment, pensioners trying to find food in garbage bins, 49% of the young people unemployed, a large number of people impoverished. These are dangerous times for us. When markets rule instead of people, then these are dangerous times for us. When you're having a police state, these are dangerous times for us. And when there's not much democracy around, this is even worse, because you don't really know how to handle this. How can you handle when people vote and then you get the markets say, no, okay, we don't really care what you voted, but you have to follow that rules. You have to follow that program, no matter what you have voted. So these are really dangerous times that influence our work, as you can imagine. So is there any hope in this? I can't see anything than that. That's where I can get hope. When 50,000 people get outside of the parliament and protest. So getting together might be hope for us. We do get hope out of this. So I stop here with this little crisis thing and take you to the other issue, which is the so-called refugees issue, crisis. I would rather call it the European crisis, our humanitarian crisis, our Eastern values crisis, because it's not a really refugee crisis. Refugees don't. They are not the problem. Refugees have problems. So you see this nice little piece of art that this Lebanese artist created about to show the great journey of the Syrian people traveling, walking actually from Syria, not even from Syria, even from Afghanistan to Central Europe. But the reality is not as nice. This is bad. People leave their homes because they cannot stay there. They don't have a choice, actually. Children on Lesbos Island camp, when they arrived, and we go around with our colleagues and try to spend some time with them, and draw some pictures, they draw this kind of pictures. So these are dangerous times, when children draw these kind of pictures, trying to represent the life they live in. These are dangerous times for us. 600,000 people arrived in Greek islands in the last 3-4 months. Can you imagine 600,000 people arriving in 2-3 months? Which actually, if you imagine, it's nothing. If you imagine there are 4 million Syrians living around in Turkey, in Lebanon, and Jordan. And even if you can imagine, there are 60 million people, refugees around the world, which is the highest ever number after the Second World War. These are dangerous times. So 600,000 in Europe, what a big deal. It's 0.something%. So it's dangerous times when people have to make this trip. Not only for them, but for us, for me. It's even worse when a lot of them get drowned. 1,800 children drowned this summer. How can we cope with this? When if one, as you know, this motto of saying about being one child dead is tragic and many is statistics. It's happening there in front of us during the summer while we're having holidays in the Greek islands. We have to rethink our lives again. And not only just the Greeks, a lot of tourists that they were in this summer in Greece. They went through this. Dangerous times when children arrive alone. What happened to them? There are dangerous times when this child in Lesbos camp somebody was trying to take a photograph, and I put a camera in front of this child. The child thought it was a gun, and he put up his arms like this. These are dangerous times. There are dangerous times when we build fences between countries. Again, in Europe, which I haven't seen since the Second World War. Fences like that. These are dangerous times when our life is getting more of this. These are dangerous times. Doesn't really matter where it is. This is somewhere in Central Europe. But it offends me and a lot of people, I think. For in today's Europe, we leave pictures like that. I think you might have seen that before. It's by the Bulgarian artists. So these are some coming to hope. Just give 1 minute there. So where do we get hope from as teachers? We come more and more to realize the small things in the class that we don't normally do within the curriculum, but they're doing towards this awareness and acceptance of the other and the fellow colleagues. There is some hope there if you do more of this type of curriculum. And drama is good for this, because empathy, simulation, role-playing, it's good. It's more effective, and it's faster route for deeper understanding. And more teachers in Greece now, they come to realize that, and there is hope here. In our association, this year, worked on a project with United Nations High Commissioner for the Refugees, and the project create workshops and trying for awareness in schools and teachers. We had so many applications. We had something like 4 times more applications than those who can afford. That means a lot of teachers, more teachers every time they're more sensitive and want to do something about it. And there is hope here. There is hope when these teachers on the islands of Leros and Samos and Chios, they work with their students and their parents, and they create food for the refugees every day, 24 hours, all summer until now. There's hope here. There's hope when nearly all schools in Greece at the moment, and teachers, they get clothes and food and send them to the islands, to several solidarity groups. There is hope here where this colleague of ours, this man on the right, who is a music teacher on the island of Leros, he invited in his house a family from Syria who had just arrived in this little island for a plate of soup and stay there for 3 days before they found out their way to Athens. They opened the houses and they took them home. So there's hope here. There's hope here when a lot of volunteers from everywhere in the world, they get on the islands and cook together with the refugees, and they eat together. It's not about charity. It's about cooking and eating together. There's hope here when artists and teachers and our colleagues, they go around into camps and bring to these children some moments. There is hope when there's international movement in Europe. And finally, there is hope when these 3 ladies from a Lesbos village took over to feed the baby of that Syrian woman that she was been walking for 35 kilometers to get to the nearest town, and she was exhausted. And the 3 old ladies, they took to try to feed the baby of the Syrian woman. So I think there is hope here. There's hope here in solidarity clinics. Hope comes with solidarity. Thank you very much.
You're getting a really small glimpse here of the week that we've spent together struggling to hear the details of each other's lived worlds and contexts. I want to invite up now Dr. Mirto Pigu-Rapuzzi, who is the program coordinator of the MA in Theatre Studies in the Department of Drama and Theatre Education at the Open University of Cyprus. And she is going to address the question, Art as Intervention, the role of theatre. In light of ongoing and overlapping global crises, what can we do with art?
Okay, I have tried to make my brief presentation as broad as possible so it can concern us all, but at the same time as concrete as possible so that it is informative and that all of us can find some food for thought in it for our later conversation. I'm wondering many times what do we mean by the term theatre as a form of social intervention? Do we mean tangible outcomes in the space around us? Do we mean results, policies, changes in our public discourses, students change in ways students change in the ways that they perceive social issues? What do we mean? Do we mean step-by-step changes that are achieved through the constant and systematic participation of our students in theatrical activities? Social anthropologists and performance theorists identify certain moments of human rituals in which the participants find themselves in a transitional stage between two situations. These moments, which negotiate our personal and social conditions are called liminal. I argued that these liminal moments are what we have in drama as a most powerful vehicle for social intervention. We have a range of choices to reach this moment, as well as the range of practices of drama. My research experience in the domain of theater as social intervention began with the research I undertook for my doctoral thesis between 2008 and 2011, when the first manifestation of the financial crisis appeared in the Greek society. This research was conducted in secondary schools and aimed to explore the role that theater can play in citizenship education. Among the main concepts of this project was what we call praxis-informed action, dialogue as an act of negotiation and as an effort to find common ground, collective initiative, and probably the most relevant to drama, social imaginary. Social imaginary, initiated by the philosopher Cornelius Castoriadis, refers to a democracy and says that for a democracy to survive must be constantly reinvented, recreated, reimagined by its members. In our classes, we know that the knowledge to imagine and create worlds comes only in the act of doing it. So, I don't mean that we should neglect our constant update of our methodologies, our practices, but the most important is to create contexts of creation, contexts of care and hope. One of the most crucial the context of the educational experience was a very important factor in all the professional environments I have been. Even in programs where we had to travel in camps where Roma lived and where the neighborhood was becoming a battlefield between the Roma and the Greek population. But for a program to have sustainability or for any kind of result to be ensured in each school, follow-up actions and everyday struggles, praxis and dialogue has to remain there. And then another thing which is very much related to the project that brought us here, RadicalHope. Students' care, students' hope, students' interest is what we have as a basis for these recreations. What a group or a community cares for, the things that concern them, should play the most important role in the shaping of our educational objectives. This requires flexibility on our part. We need to be able to readapt, to reinvent our aims and processes to the student's reality. And we have to persuade our students that our practices match their hope and their care.
Thank you, Myrto. I'd like to call to the podium now Mr. Michael Limerick, who is the Assistant Curriculum Leader of Drama, Visual Media, Arts, and Music, and the Creativity, Action, and Service Coordinator for the IB program at Monarch Park Collegiate Institute in the east end of this city. And he is also our collaborator in the field. And he's going to return us to theater as metaphor. He's going to take his Toronto perspective and revisit art, theater, and schooling and why these matter.
Thank you, Kathleen. I'd like to start by saying how honored I am to be a part of this panel, and I'd like to thank Kathleen for that, and also her wonderful team who was working with me last year for the whole verbatim unit, and will be rejoining us starting next week on the work that we're going to be doing with telling our stories. And I'm also honored to meet all of these wonderful people on the panel. I met them at the beginning of this week, and I was actually honored to be part of the kickoff for their whole experience here, because they came to visit myself and my grade 11-12 split class at Monarch Park. And that was their first foray into this whole experience for the week. And their timing was actually really good, because at that point I had just finished helping them produce their first 2 one-act plays for our particular class. And what was really exciting for me was all of the feedback that I received from my colleagues up here, because they thought that I had such a wonderful, wonderful class. And their timing was really good, because we just finished our dress rehearsal for production. We just had our 2 shows the last 2 days. And it's the part of the process in my class where everything sort of comes together. So when you're dealing with production and you're working on all of these collaborative strategies, it isn't until they're actually on stage in front of the spectators doing their thing that they really start to gel and become sort of this family. And we had just finished our dress rehearsal the day before these wonderful people arrived, and I was getting all these great compliments about how great the students were and how well I was working with them. And I have to attribute most of that to the process that we had just finished with production. I'm going to come back to this towards the end of what I'm going to be talking about here, because that ties into the whole idea of theater as metaphor for me. So immediately when I thought about theater as metaphor for the world, I could not stop thinking about the heart. And I think about the heart in 2 ways, the idea of being the life force and sort of central to the body, but also the idea of feelings, you know, and the whole idea of the heart itself. So education seems to always focus on what's happening up here. Learning, the idea of thinking, we think about knowledge and understanding, all of these are connected with the mind. And we can think about athletics, which is also the focus on the body. Drama does all of these things, but I think what it does best is really focus on the idea of the heart. And it's the connection to the heart and to feeling that I think is key, and that's sort of what I wanted to talk about a little bit. So you do think about the heart as the organ being central to the body. And I think at my particular school, it's not an art school, it's a regular secondary school, but the arts at my particular school does very much feel like it's the heart of the school. In high school, the arts are often the ones that are asked to do the showcases, to demonstrate things in terms of activities, assemblies, performances, stage crew. All of these things are necessary for a school to run and to have some vibrancy, all of these sorts of things. But quite often in traditional schools, they're also seen as being kind of fringe, or maybe the icing, and not being the essential or as important as some of the core subjects. You know, it's an elective, you know, they can choose one or the other, these sorts of things, but it doesn't seem to be at the core of what learning is all about, which bugs me. That's sort of the feeling that people have. But without the idea of having drama and the arts in general, imagine what schools would actually be like. That if that heart is missing, things would be rather dull, I think, in day-to-day life for students themselves. In terms of performance, the process of learning and the things that are connected with it is very much connected to the heart. The feelings of my students And this particular group that I was just talking about earlier, they even mentioned it today in our debrief after the show about becoming a family. The idea that students can say and feel and act in ways that they cannot in any other classes demonstrates how important I think the idea of the heart is. So we just completed our 2 one-act plays that I mentioned, and this is the first year that I was actually dealing with an 11-12 split class, which is a whole other issue at my particular school. The arts is starting to shrink significantly. And since I taught the grade 11 program to the grade 12s that I was currently teaching, and I'm convinced that I'm going to try to get my regular grade 11, my regular grade 12 classes back. I wasn't going to reinvent the wheel and try to create a new curriculum that was going to address both needs. So rather stupidly, I'm trying to keep the grade 11s sort of separate and the grade 12s kind of separate. And that meant doing 2 one-act plays at the same time. And this was chaos, but it all sort of worked towards the end. So they did become like a family. They bickered, they got frustrated with each other at times, but today in their discussions, those frustrations were articulated constructively, and the focus is more on praise and very, very positive. They were proud of themselves and realized that they accomplished something great. They had 4 different experiences with spectators, and everything in them was just showing pride. The reaction of the spectators, the teachers, and their peers confirmed all of this good work, and their initial groupings before the production suddenly started to shift. So there were little groups that were hanging out with other people, and then all of a sudden, even when we were talking about the process, I saw new groupings of people, and the hugs that people were giving, and even the underdogs that were problems during the part of the process, they were giving them praise, and these guys were beaming. They became this sort of family. And for me, all of that is just sort of connected to what's happening in the heart. And so when I think about theater, particularly in these dangerous times, I think it's wonderful to have an opportunity within a school for students to focus on the ideal of, and it was mentioned before, the idea of emotional truth versus just the factual truth. To be able to feel and to articulate those feelings in a really meaningful way. And I'm just honored to always have those experiences with my students. And I think I'll wrap it up there. So thank you very much.
So given the context that we've set, it's not surprising to me that we all want to stand up here and celebrate a little bit. But I assure you we've been in some pretty uncomfortable conversations all week as well, because drama doesn't meet its promise a lot of times. And these moments of feeling like a family and hugging each other are hard-won moments. They're earned. There's no magic bullet with drama. There's no guarantee that we land there. But the idea that we can even fail and survive is pretty hopeful in these times. So I feel like, you know, we're playing off each other's vibe quite a bit, but we also have looked failure pretty starkly in the eye over the course of the week. That seems like a heck of an introduction to invite Christine Jackson, the head of arts. Speaking of failure, I'd now like to welcome to the... There was no segue in that at all. But I am inviting the coordinator of the arts, Christine Jackson, to the stage and to speak to I don't know what. If I were in her shoes, I'd suddenly have a stomachache and be out of the room. But I do want to invite her up because she has really been there with us, not just imagining this event this week and this evening, but even conceiving the research, because we want to do research that matters. We want to do research that meets with its important publics, and certainly schools at the system level and in individual classrooms is one of those crucial publics that we're concerned with. So I want to invite her to resonate with and give us a a system perspective, it's very funny when you, not funny, but interesting, when you come together, you cannot help but compare your world to the world of others on all kinds of levels, including the status of drama in a system of education, which Michael was speaking a little bit to, but also our everyday experiences, our everyday lives. And Christine really has her finger on that pulse for a lot of teachers and a lot of students in this city. So I welcome her to the stage.
Thank you, Kathleen. Hi, everyone. I feel like I'm really in trouble here. I have words all over about 12 different pages, and I'm still trying to figure out exactly what the role of respondent is. But my head is just pulsating with ideas, and my heart is pounding with lots of feelings. And I thought I would start, by recapping. Because I love words, I just am summarizing a few of your words. It doesn't capture everything, but in terms of resonating with you this evening, this is what I have to begin with. The shared labor of negotiating personal identities and relationships. Congregate. The many different things that divide us and unite us. Memory. Undemocratic democracies, bold, brave upset of oppressive structures, voice, agency. A circle of talk amidst the whine, whir, clang of sirens. A site for forging possible selves, taking it to the streets. The proximity of the unfamiliar, improvise, interact, imagine, stepping into each other's words. The interconnectedness of our futures. These are dangerous times for us. Error 404, arriving alone. These are dangerous times for us. There is hope here and here and here. Reinventing democracy, the heart, circulation, hacking into hope, radically hacking into radical hope, research that matters. So thank you for those thoughts and those words. My words that I might share this evening are really a little bit about the context of schooling, of teaching, of learning, of congregating, and trying to transform our world within the schools in the Toronto District School Board, the largest school board in North America, over 500 schools, I think. I can never get that number straight in my head. And we have many, many challenges, and there is so much that's happening that is truly inspiring, and there is so much that is happening that is truly troubling. Multiple truths of the experience for our youth in our schools and in our city, and multiple truths for the experience of our teachers in multiple kinds of learning environments and situations. In the Toronto District School Board in 2006 and then again in 2012, they conducted a student survey to kind of get an eye into how our kids are feeling, grades 7 to 12. Well, 3/4 of our students in 2012 showed much improvement over 2006. So there's some hope there in those stats and numbers and responses. We know that 3/4 of our students, however, grades 7 to 12, are very worried about their future, and they are very worried about their performance in school. About half of our students have very, very serious anxiety and worries about family matters. 81% of our students feel safe in their schools, grades 7 to 12. 92% feel safe in their classrooms. There is hope in that, but there's also concern. What about those who are not feeling safe? There's also lots in the survey, and you can find it on the TDSB website if it's of interest to you, about how students, their own self-perceptions around their emotional well-being. And what we see is a decline in their sense of emotional well-being as they proceed through the grades. The self-perception also shows that for many students who score themselves as having anxiety and concern, they score themselves as not doing well academically, but the numbers tell another story. They actually are doing as well academically as the students who feel positive, but their perception tells another story. Multiple truths. And who's telling that story? And what do these stories mean without diving more deeply? So I'm really, really inspired by these stories of what is happening in schools in these very, very diverse settings. And we have very, very diverse settings within our schools in Toronto as well. And here in Ontario, we teach drama from kindergarten to grade 12, which is also a story of hope. So that by the time a student takes drama in grade 9, hopefully they have some experience with telling personal stories, with oral history. They have experience with devising some form of expression using words, using the body. They have had embodied experiences. And so we can go further, we can go deeper with them. There is hope in that as well. But it is very, very complex still. We have multiplicities of truth, multiplicities of problems. We have that which divides us, and we have that which unites us. And sometimes it's all happening at the same time. So I have huge respect for what the teacher in the drama studio or classroom is doing. How I would have liked to be a fly in the wall in Michael's classroom or any of your classrooms the day after the events in Paris or in Beirut. What does one do? Do you take out your lesson plan? Today we are creating a devised theater piece about whatever. Or do you have a conversation? What do you do? And how do you decide that? Does the teacher decide that? Who makes that decision? So I have many, many more questions than answers to anything. I happened this morning in my role, I drive from Scarborough to Etobicoke, down to the AGO. I was in 3 different parts of the city today, and I had the pleasure of capturing just a little piece on Q today with a poet, Saul Williams. Do any of you know Saul Williams' work? He's a spoken word artist from the States who has recently returned from Paris. And the question that he was sitting with in the interview this morning was, you know, are we as artists doing enough? Is there more we could be doing? Is there something we could be doing to engage disenfranchised youth so that they can be giving their lives to life instead of giving their lives, you know, to destruction? And I thought, so many of us in so many different zones and so many different parts of the world and so many different careers and professions are asking the same question right now. Teachers were asking it. Should we be doing more? Should we be doing differently? Should we be doing with whom should we be doing? And I think it's a very, very important question. But the radical hope that lies behind that comes through in all of your stories of the work and the projects and the research that you're doing, is that we keep going and we keep asking the hard questions. And we just keep going. There's something about that collaborative struggle. And when we engage students in the collaborative struggle, we're teaching something about what it means to be responsible, So one of the questions was about, how do we deal with these big problems of the world, and how do we do it in a responsible way? When do we adopt another's perspective? When do we visit another and have a conversation to learn? I work with colleagues in the Aboriginal Education Centre, and it is such a journey of learning for me as we try to work together and come together to just begin the massive undertaking of decolonizing our schools and indigenizing our schools. And much of what we do in the drama classroom is at the beginning of that. Our meeting in a circle is significant and has been for a long, long time, that circle of talk that I heard referenced. However, they were in trying to in-service across the TDSB, this massive board, bringing teachers from every family of schools, hundreds and hundreds of teachers together to learn about our colonial history. They decided to use a simulation called Walk a Mile in my moccasins. Well, after that interaction with many, many different people, they're coming up against some challenges and really rethinking, how do we learn? How do we struggle together to understand our past and together to create a new future without trying to own someone else's story, but deeply trying to understand it, not just identify with it and say, yes, I feel your pain in my life, turn it back to my story. But how with our students do we come to understand our difference as well as things that can unite us? So those, I think, are big themes that I'm hearing throughout your diverse projects and contexts. And again, I think that the radical side of hope is that it's a choice. It's a choice we make every day when we make drama, when we enter into imagined contexts with our students. And we don't know what they're bringing necessarily. We don't know the totality of it for sure. We come to know our students through the work that we create together. But there's so much that we don't know. There's so much that all of us, including teachers, need to, keep private and personal. But that process of opening to one another is a practice of radical hope. We have so much to learn from our educators, the scholars, the practitioners around the world. And the TDSB is a big city, but it can, Michael, I don't want to speak for you, but something I do hear from our teachers often in drama is that it can be very isolated. You can be in a corner of a filthy basement, and all you have are kids who you're trying to help come to a place of wide awakeness, as Maxine Green talks about, so that we can be wide awake to each other and wide awake to the words on the page that we might be working with. And that's a lot of really, really hard work. So if we only stay in that cocoon that can sometimes feel pretty safe with our students doing our very, very, challenging but inspiring work, where do we get inspired? Where do we find our hope? These are challenging times for teachers. These are hyper-conservative times in education. I get asked at least once every 2 months for the list of approved plays for study. And every time I say, there is no such thing. This does not exist. But people are careful and cautious because of the collisions of ideologies, of beliefs, of understandings. But boy, do we have an opportunity to journey together through that, what can sometimes feel like a minefield, challenging terrain, but we find clearings, we find circles for talk, and we are indeed meaning-making machines. I'll close with this. A grade 7 student at Parkdale Public School, this goes back a number of years now, we were doing a project there. They had done a survey of their students They wanted to know, what do our students worry about? The number one fear that came up in that community was this sense of being right on the cusp of homelessness. So we did an extended drama project over a number of months about home, about homelessness. We used storybooks, we used poetry, we used a whole rich array of things, and it was and a lot of visual art. It was a very powerful project. Back in the day, students used to get to write something on their report card before the ministry took them over and turned them into little boxes. Students could draw pictures and write something about themselves as a learner. And this grade 7 student, her self-reflection was, what I do good in is drama and art, because it helps me make sense of the chaos of my world. And that, I still get chills. It has resonated with me. It was what fueled my studies, my graduate studies, and continues to drive the work that we do with teachers. So many of you talked about the importance of relevance for students, that it needs to be relevant and meaningful to their lives, and I think that student is speaking directly to that. So, hacking into radical hope. Saul Williams, the poet, he talks about hacking into hope, hacking into resilience, thinking of it in that mode, that it's there to be tapped into. Let's take it. So let's see some hope. Let's support each other as we engage in the action, the practice, the behavior of hope in these dangerous, difficult times. Thank you so much.
Wow, she didn't need to fake a stomach ache at all. That was really fantastic, Christine. Thank you for bringing it home and taking it away as well. We have a bit of time, and we have a really nice reception, too. But we do want to give you an opportunity to throw some questions up. They can be to everyone. They can be to no one. They can be your thoughts. They can be directed to a person or multiple people. Your choice, but we do have about 15 minutes where we can hear some reactions or questions. We have mics out there, and then we're going to have some nice drink and food after that. Another kind of nourishment beyond metaphor.
Thank you very much for the presentation. I think one of the things that surfaced for me was the hope in doing. So my question is really about the doing between Kathleen's research idea and, Michael, your work in classrooms and working on verbatim. And I wondered if you could give us a little more of an idea of what actually happened in those classrooms, looking at verbatim. And my secondary question associated with that is, were you looking at hope explicitly? Were you asking your students about hope, or were you bearing witness to what they were doing as hopeful acts?
Actually, can I just switch this? Sorry, I'm not sure what to be doing here. Okay. Or should okay. So you can sit down. Okay. So the first part of the question was what we did in verbatim. So we actually used the unit that was embedded in Code, the Code website. So we actually went through that process. It was a condensed version.
We have to do this. We have to give a shout out to Naomi Savage, who developed that unit. And she developed it in partnership with Andrew Kushner and his colleagues, and in the context of our previous research project, and to Code, this amazing organization that disseminates it far and wide. So this is a team effort.
Thank you. So that's where the basic information came from. But we sort of whittled it down to, we did all of the lessons, but some of them were sort of condensed versions of those lessons. And actually, at one point, I ended up going to the Amazon on a Me to We trip and had a supply teacher do part of that, but that's a whole other part of it. But we went through the process, so we talked about defining verbatim, talked about docudrama, we went through all the exercises, the overheard conversation, all of the units. And my objective was to use this as the culminating activity as a performance for our annual spring show, which is our Arts Night showcase. So as we were going through the process, the students were a little skeptical initially because the whole idea of verbatim seemed a little dry. It seemed very prescribed. It didn't feel like it was their authentic voice until we got to the unit that dealt with composite characters. And that was the moment where they got to ask their peers in their classroom very specific questions about their particular lives when they were going to be leaving school, their lives in the context of being young people in Canada, and what their goals and objectives were 5, 10 years from now. And when they asked each other those specific questions, it was amazing. First of all, they were amazed at some of the answers that they'd had, but when they heard the answers back verbatim for what they had actually said, that's really where the unit took off for that particular class. And then they created these composite characters using bits and pieces of these pieces verbatim to create these monologues, and then we structured it in a way that they would use bits and pieces of the monologues, and we did some movement, used different blocks and levels and surfaces, and the performance itself was amazing. And you could hear a pin drop in the auditorium when they did it, and that brought further amazement and really resonated with them. The hope aspect of it did sort of come in after the process, and we actually started to talk, and particularly the researchers themselves that did individual interviews, group interviews with them, didn't have to ask that question specifically, but it just seemed to pour out of them in the context of the work. So that's sort of how that all played out. It was an incredibly wonderful experience, and it was a great unit too, so thank you very much.
Any other questions or thoughts or reactions or provocations? Yeah, someone at the back.
I have a question about how the group of you all came together. Kathleen, my understanding is that you brought people together, but I don't know how you chose them, what that process was to form this collective.
Okay, I won't go into great detail, but I do want to say that story must be the basis of it. I had met in a variety of different contexts every one of these individual people, and we had met each other. We'd had encounters, and I had either admired practice or engaged in dynamic intellectual conversation or shared a drink at a conference, learned about the work. The stories are so varied, but each marked me in a very particular way, and I had the impulse that all of these people needed to know each other, that I knew everyone and they didn't know each other. And so that was really there were so many serendipitous stories that we talked a little bit about this when we first met each other at the beginning of this week. Life often seems like serendipity, but then meaning making machines that we are, we find some kind of purpose and solidarity, and it seemed to me, as I was imagining the research, that I had big stories in my head about sites where youth social unrest was really unfolding in ways that were both alarming and to me very engaging. And so I started to bring sites in where I thought that social dislocation and the breakdown of a sense of community was happening in very stark ways in those sites. And so that was the idea, that I wanted to, people who were in extremely different ways dealing with this notion of youth social unrest in schools, in theaters, in community organizations, should come together and see what we could learn from each other.
I have a question and it addresses something Michael brought up about the feeling that students say of feeling like a family. And it's something that I often feel uncomfortable with at the end of the process, because the students come together for this moment in time, and they feel so, and for many of us who've worked in theater, you feel so inspired and connected to all these people, and then the show is over and everybody feels pretty depressed, especially when you're young and you have that first experience of real connectedness with a group of people. And I often feel like I am abandoning them at the end to that feeling. And how do we help students to sustain those feelings and that connectedness beyond that place and time, or do we just celebrate that it happened in that moment? And there is no real way of doing that other than through Facebook and random encounters on the internet. It's difficult. So I've struggled with the loss that happens at the end of the experience.
Thanks, Naomi. That's such a crucial question, and I think there are many people sitting up here who would love to address it.
Can I do it? Okay, thank you. I think that's a brilliant question. It's one I always struggle with, because I remember being that student and being utterly depressed when the play was over and you feel that sense of loss. But I've got a response to that. I think dear colleague of mine, Joe Winston's recently written a book. Actually, it was a long time ago. It was in 2010, but it feels recent, whatever that says about my life. He wrote a book about beauty and education, and the experience of beauty can be an educational experience as well. And sort of one of his questions is, why is beauty sleeping in education? Why isn't it spoken about more? And anyway, so one of the things he talks about is actually that one of the reasons why we're compelled to work together, why we enjoy working together, is because beauty is fleeting. It's the fact that it's ephemeral. It's the fact that it finishes. That's what makes us want more. That's what gets us to go back and to recreate those experiences. And I would lay odds, but I might be wrong, that's also what gets teachers to become teachers, drama teachers, because you want to recreate those fleeting moments. You want to give those moments, you want those fires to burn for other students as well. So I totally know what you mean, that you feel that sense of loss, and particularly I think it's an ethical problem for me as a researcher, because I often feel, this is dodgy when I'm going, dodgy? Yep. Just checking my English slang. When I go into these contexts and it's like, you do a lovely project and then you're off, that's problematic, and there's all sorts of things you can do to counter that: long-term partnerships with schools, sustainable relationships with theatre companies, etc. But I think part of the power of it, part of the attraction of it, is that it ends, and it's finding ways to bring that about again and reimagine new ways to experience the fleeting nature of beauty.
Thanks, Rachel. Andrew, can I ask you, from your vantage point, and Urvashi, can you take this question, being a professional theater maker? Is that why you're doing it? You just keep trying to get that feeling back?
I'm an addict. I wrote down the word mortality, and that there is a fundamental mortality to theater, and that for the acting practice, for the giving life to words practice, to the audience engagement with those words, with those images, it's moment, 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 and each moment passes on. And I think that's fundamental to the work. It's fundamental to the practice. And I think the fact that it's not sustainable points to the fact that it is practice as opposed to product, as opposed to a sealed thing, which doesn't make it hurt any less. It's interesting. My play just started 2 minutes ago. It's my first time not being with it. You're watching it on? That is an illegal feed. But yeah, we have these attachments, and by virtue of we are engaging our hearts in this work, and there is a mourning, there is a mortality to it. But I do think that's part of what makes it exquisite, what makes it divine.
Thanks, Andrew. Urvashi, you get this question all the time because of the amazing work you do, and then people say, but then those girls go out into the world and it's not so lovely. And so I would love you to address, or say anything else, disregard my prompt entirely, but I know you get this question a lot.
Yeah. So in terms of mortality, you spoke of that, and about it ending. I don't know that it ends. Because what the event might have ended, but it has changed you almost permanently, and that's what sustains, and that's what you carry. And in terms of families don't always live together. They do disperse, but they don't stop loving each other just because they disperse, right? And so with our girls as well, they do go into the world, but we've had generations of girls leave, but they never really leave. They come back as alum to help, mentor, and guide their juniors. Even in the latest performance that we did, it was a collaborative process between the alum, the current students, the teacher, and from their experience and their lives, giving hope, lending courage, lending themselves to the performance and to the lives of their students.
No one else wants to jump in? Yeah, I knew Nikos would.
I want to make a comment on this because this doesn't happen to my country. Of course, we do theater and with young people. When we do theater with young people, we don't do it in the same setting as you do. For example, we don't have a drama class. We don't have it as a subject in the school. So it's always something we do outside of the school hours, as you could probably call theater clubs, or you do it in afternoons and the weekends. So there's a lot of enthusiasm there. There's a lot of volunteer work, unpaid work, of course. And when the show finishes, there's like this extreme enthusiasm and about the next one. So I'm surprised that you hear that. I want to talk a bit more with you, baby, if you want, to explain a bit more about that. No, there's no. On the contrary, in our case, there's such an enthusiasm that we've done it. Yes, we go for another one. Well, when do we start? Tomorrow? Yes. So next weekend we're here again at the same time.
In fact, you spoke of moments, and there's a Buddhist theory called momentariness, Kshanikvad, which says that one moment always leads to another. So even though it's momentary and it ends, but it doesn't end before the other one starts, like a flame.
Can I ask you a question, please? I mean, I don't know, have you met your students many years after? And yeah, does it happen? And if you ask them, what do you remember from our shows, from our drama classes, what do they remember? Do they remember the play they were in?
Sometimes.
Yes, in our case, not.
Mostly the people and the friendships and the community, I think.
Yeah, that's what's, yeah.
Yeah.
Might not remember the part they were playing or even the play sometimes.
Yeah.
There's so many other details they remember about how they worked together, the nice time they had going out after the show, which is nice. Anyway.
I guess just to address what you had said is that the students that I've worked with aren't the students that would be able to have the time to do the after school or the weekends. They're taking it as credits to earn credits. They're doing the play. So the experience is only that time.
And why wouldn't they have time, Naomi?
Because they're working and have other family responsibilities, and they wouldn't have the time to volunteer or to do after school or weekends.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. That's allowed.
Thank you. I have a question. I'm not sure it fits, but I'm going to ask it, and you can tell me if it's completely inappropriate. But it's more about, I'm thinking as I'm sitting here, as everyone's talking around drama in the context of the school environment and that class within a whole school. And so we talk a lot about the whole child and the education around the whole child, but I'm sitting here thinking about the whole school. And so I'm thinking about the powerful experiences that go on in a drama class that those students, particularly in high school, take into their other classes where that experience didn't happen and where that conversation didn't happen or that, that exchange didn't happen. And how do, I'm not a drama teacher, so I can easily ask this question, how do drama teachers connect that experience to the rest of the life of that child in that school, if that makes sense? Does that make sense? Yeah. I guess it was a hard question, huh?
Can I share something? Oops. Okay, I'll just do this. Maybe you can sit for a while. Sure. Because she's been standing there long. I just went to a high school to share my community theater performance that I have done with my university students. The whole school came. We were just so afraid because we were informed that morning the whole school will come. So in my experience, we will have some connections with high school, either junior high or senior high school in Taiwan, and we will bring our university students' performance to their schools. And one thing happened after our performance. The performance is only lasts for 15 minutes, and all the junior high school students, they are like between 12 to 15. They're all very quiet. At the beginning, they're a little bit noisy, but through the performance, they become quiet, and at the end, they all applauded very heartily, and we were very happy. And one student came to me after the performance. He told me that you should come every month, and we were really, really pleased. I think we have to create our connections as a drama company or as school teachers, no matter where we are. We bring our performance to our students, the younger students, so that they're not only seeing it in the professional theater world, but also in an amateur way. So they are exposed. We go to them if they don't come to us. That's my sharing.
Christine's going to take a stab at this, and Lois, I think you have a question, and then we'll wrap up unless something is burning for someone, and we'll break some bread together.
Thanks. No, I think it's a great question, Patty, and I thank you for it, because what we often experience in the arts within the world of schools is we are called upon. I get calls all the time, and I know teachers do as well. We need some decorations and some entertainment for whatever special event is coming up. And we do parade out the kids to do, powerful performance work for those events, with the hope that beyond entertaining, we are moving and impacting people in places of power, whether that's the parent group, they have power, whether that's senior officials at the board, the principal of the school who's been withholding budget, whatever it might be. So there's all that kind of advocacy work. But in a document I pulled together for Code of just a chorus of voices from teachers, principals, students, artists in the community. This was a question I put to a principal, Jane DeLuzio, retired vice principal. And Jane had some interesting things to share about how to embed drama into the culture of the entire school. So what is the priority of that school? Is it safe schools? Is it emotional well-being? Is it math scores? Whatever it might be. And then to use the art forms in an effective but still aesthetically significant, impactful way to address issues or foci that is shared by the larger school community. And then it can become a modality that really advances conversations in the school. So I don't know if that entirely addresses it. And for many of us who have worked in theater or loved drama in school, I know for me it was Sister Connie. I was the kid who knew nobody, who was completely isolated with my book in a corner all the time till she forcibly dragged me into a drama class, a place that you know, where I could have a voice and make connections. So I think there's that as well, that teachers are actively engaging kids in the hallway. We're recruiting kids all the time who we know the pedagogy of connectedness in our drama classrooms will reach. So there's that piece as well. Those kids we nab and say, you need to come to drama or come to drama club. A couple of thoughts.
Okay, Lois.
So as I understand it, you're expressly exploring verbatim and oral history performance and ensemble or devising as drama forms or techniques. And to me, in some ways, it's unsurprising that you're finding that these are a way of engaging in radical hope with young people. And what I'm curious about is whether there's anything about these drama forms or aesthetic practices that have surprised you as possibilities or as being risky. That's what I want to know.
One surprise is that we all interpret it differently. So I think I want to invite my collaborators to address that question. So Lois is asking about, with the particular form, so we really have only done verbatim and are beginning oral history performance. Whether in the use of that particular form, we have had any surprising discoveries. Mirta.
For me, what was surprising was that students' reaction concerning saying their classmates' words and speech. I thought that if you have a text, you don't care who has written it. If it's another person's text, then the thing you want to do is to interpret it the best way. But the fact that they knew the person or that wrote this text or that the person who spoke this text changed a lot the dynamics and their own expectations from themselves to be faithful or to change or not to change word and to express all the meanings of this text. I think I wouldn't expect that in this extent as it happened.
The added responsibility that the words actually belong to someone and they have entrusted you with their words. I have a feeling, Andrew, you might be able to say something about that.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, this has happened in the classroom, but I think that I think a verbatim is activating the imagination and the conscience at once, and I think that should extend, in fact, to other forms of writing. But it really does. There are triggers, there are cues when you're engaging with verbatim text by virtue of there being an originator, and that originator is out in the world. And in some cases, when we look at a play like The Middle Place, which is populated by at-risk youth, those youth may be in the audience at a certain point. And as a result, what I've witnessed and what Alan, my collaborator, and I have really championed is a kind of an actor selflessness, a kind of encounter with the rhythms as they are, the voices as they are, as opposed to employing text as some kind of means to an end. It is an end in and of itself. And so certainly in my practice and in rehearsals, there is a kind of care that creeps in that we don't always get in other textual forms.
Get on to something. I think for me, verbatim theater or oral history performance or devising, we are trying to give voice to our students. using their own voices. I think these are the aesthetic forms we think are close to address these important issues. The second thing is the ethical connections these performances can provoke our students to engage in. Because verbatim theater, they have to listen to each other's stories, or oral history performance, they have to share their life stories and personal stories, and to find a communal or consensus meaning in their negotiation, or devising the collaboration they are looking for, and what kind of communication they can have through this collaborative process. That's my take.
Share with you, I would like to make a comment about the risk. I think you said something about the risk. It happened to us a number of times in Greece when teachers invite students to share personal stories. Well, their parents came to the school next day and they started complaining to the principal that happened. So it needs a kind of we have to be very careful with this. First, we don't do psychodrama. We're not specialists for that. We're doing theater. We're doing arts. And I always, when that goes to very personal stories, I just keep on reminding my students, no, this is art. So taking back to this side again, and then slowly to that side again, and then back. And it's tricky, really. And it can be risky. And because students, particularly in their very young age, may bring into the group data from their family that otherwise the family would not like to be revealed. It happened quite often about divorces, about home violence. And how you deal with that? It's not easy. Well, there are ways to deal with it, of course, and I know, I'm sure many of you have much more experience than me on that. But this is risky. There's a risk there.
Yeah, both things are true. We're going to thank our group on the stage again for sharing with us. And we're going to thank all of you for imagining that this conversation was worth having, and for being with us and bringing your voices as well today. And offer some fruit and some sweets and some coffee or juices. Please stay, mingle, chat, and again, thank you so much.